And I like to tell people on my workshops, I use this phrase all the time. I say, less is more, which means obviously the fewer things are in your frame, the less stuff going on, the better. Okay, so these kind of photos I do take sometimes. We talked a little bit about motion, and sometimes it turns out pretty cool, but sometimes it turns out a little more like this. There's a little bit more structure to it, and the reason I feel is because it's just simpler. There's less stuff in the frame, so I kind of know what I'm supposed to look at. I mean, it would have been cool if like his hand was more in focus, whatever, or less motion blur, but honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is this cool moment being captured.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today, and I am here with Lukasz Palka, who is a photographer based in Tokyo. Hello Lukasz, how are you doing today? Thank you for joining me.
Hello everyone. Hi, yeah, thank you as well. I'm doing good. And I'm excited to talk about some photos. It's always fun to look at other people's work.
Yeah, the idea behind this is that I'm gonna show you the photos of our community, and I would like to ask you to tell us your opinion, what you think about those, and to maybe critique those as if you would have taken those, or as if maybe some of your clients, because I know that you do a workshop and you also have a YouTube channel. I explore, so maybe if you want, you can tell us a little more about your photography, your project.
Yeah, so basically, these days I'm focusing on the YouTube channel. Currently you can't really travel to Japan, so the workshops are sort of on hold right now, right? So we made it virtual. So the YouTube channel is meant to be sort of like a virtual workshop. Of course, it's not as personal as our real workshops, which we do one-on-one or in very small groups usually, which I enjoy quite a lot. But it's the second best thing, and I'm having a lot of fun with YouTube these days with my partner at iExplore named Axel. And yeah, the channel's all about shooting in Tokyo and street photography and other kinds of urban photography and a little bit of philosophy. Pinched in as well, a little pinch of philosophy in the mix.
Okay. All right. So today's round is actually a night photography. So let's get started. What do you think about the first photo?
Right. So right away, I mean, I've had it on the screen the whole time as we were, just doing the intro just now, and it's very pleasant to look at. It's a very mesmerizing photo, and it is the kind of thing that I would love to shoot especially in terms of the color and the light. So what attracts me, especially to shooting at photos at night, in a city like Tokyo or in a space like this, is the colors and the light themselves, regardless of what the subject is. And sometimes I'll frame up something really pretty mundane object, like just a bicycle or something, just because the light is beautiful. So this photo has this kind of great quality of light with the dusk, the kind of blue tones of the dusk with the nice contrast with the warm tones of the the amusement park. So that's excellent. And I have no... I wouldn't do it any different in that case. In terms of the composition and whatnot, though, I'm very picky when things are, distracting. There can be subtle things, but things that take away from where I want the subject to look. And so at first I see, of course, the carousel and its beauty and all that, but then I'm a little bit drawn to the figures at the bottom.
Okay.
And they're a little bit, I don't know, if it was me, right, if we look at it that way, I would have probably tried to either completely frame them out, at least all of them except for one. So the one man that's sticking up on the left, he's sort of silhouette against the sky. He's maybe the one that can stay. But the other ones, there's like another silhouette at the bottom. There's the little guy in the background in the sneakers and the shorts. There's another guy in a cap. I would have waited for them to move away or hid them somehow. And then even the guy who I said I like, he's looking the wrong way because he's looking away from the carousel. And so it makes me wonder, well, what's he looking at? And I'm not looking at the carousel anymore. So little things like that are secondary, and they would bother me. So I would either wait for a better moment, maybe when the main guy is looking at the carousel, or I would maybe frame them out entirely, so it's just the carousel in the sky, like from a lower position, so I don't even see the fence of the barrier, something like that. But it's still a very strong photo. I don't think it's a bad photo or anything. And one last little thing, I would love to see. I wonder what it would look like if the shutter speed was, say, like a 20th or a 10th of a second. Instead of what it is here, which is pretty fast. A pretty fast shutter speed. I'm just out of curiosity. I would have tried it for sure myself. I would have done a fast one like this, fast shutter, and I would have done another one with a very slow shutter just to see how the motion blur looks, because it might have looked really cool. But yeah, that's a different photo.
And is that something that you like to try mostly for night photography, or do you like slow shutter speed for street photography overall?
Yeah, I play around with it. So it just depends what's moving. So just people on the street, that kind of thing. Usually I don't have a idea to use a slow shutter. I mean, I'm not saying it can't work, but I haven't thought of it. But one thing I like to shoot typically is things like cars. It's kind of cliche, but things like cars or bicycles driving by, and then you do like a panning shot, right? So that's an example of when I would drag the shutter, right? And I would get it pretty slow to like a 30th or something, which would create a nice motion blur. So when I'm presented, or a train is another one, when I'm presented with movement, some sort of motion around me, then I'm curious to see what it looks like with a slow shutter. And this carousel, which I've never photographed something like this, by the way, I've never encountered something like this. If I had, I'd be curious to see, well, what would this look like with a slow shutter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm also wondering the same idea. Moving on.
Okay. So I like this one too. Again, kind of dramatic right away, where immediately it catches your attention. The thing that I like, that I also would look for in my own work, I kind of agree with it here, is that the silhouette, his position in the frame is such that he's just next to those white lights, right? So the lights frame him really well. So he's very much a silhouette, and I like that. The scene overall, though, I mean, it's not the best scene. It has the thing that a lot of city scenes have, and I struggle with this myself all the time, and that's parked cars. I really, really, really hate parked cars because they have this, I don't know, they just bother me. I look at the man first because that's clearly the main thing, but then I also look at that silver car parked in the background. Now, again, I know the photographer couldn't do anything about this, and this doesn't mean it's like automatically a bad photo, but it's just something that distracts me right away. But it's like, oh, well, you can't do anything about it. Perhaps it could have been mitigated by framing slightly differently or standing back using a longer focal length, but of course that's not always possible. The last thing that jumps out at me, though, is that it does feel like there's some, little subtle bits of motion blur and such here. Maybe the shutter speed was a little too slow. Again, not a big deal, because you can have a blurry photo that has so much like emotion and impact that you don't care that it's blurry. But when it's a photo like this, where there isn't really any emotion from the subject himself, it's just a man walking, then I'm looking more at the overall rendering, just the impact of the image as a whole. And that's when things like blurriness jump out at me. I'm like, well, why is it blurry? It could have been perfectly, motionless, right? That would make those reflections and all that stuff on the road look a lot more crisp and pop out more, and that would be more satisfying to look at, just from the terms of texture and contrast, right? But anyway, it's a good image. One last little thing, doesn't look like a busy street. I also don't like the shoulder bag. It kind of breaks the shape of the silhouette. I would have probably waited around for a different person with a better shape, but maybe that was just not possible. I've also had shots where I waited for 10 minutes and eventually I just gave up. So totally understandable. So,
all right.
That's all the stuff that comes through my mind for a shot like this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at this one.
This one I like right away. This is awesome. I like it. I like it because, I mean, of course, it's a simple photo, and I feel, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I just mean it's clear what this photo is about and what I'm supposed to look at first. We can go deeper, but at first it's a simple photo. And I like to tell people on my workshops, I use this phrase all the time. I say, less is more, which means obviously the fewer things are in your frame, the less stuff going on, the better. And like just contrasting with the previous two photos, I was pointing out some distractions in those. I was saying, okay, well, this is distracting, that's distracting. Well, in this one, there's nothing really distracting me because there's not much in the photo. It's just the things that are there are all relevant to what the photographer was trying to show me, at least show me visually, right? Just the actual content of the photo. I'm not sure what they were trying to show me emotionally, but that's okay because that's always up for my interpretation. And my interpretation emotionally of this photo is that it's kind of spooky. It's a little bit, that silhouette looks sort of inhuman, right? It looks like an alien or something. And so it's kind of a creepy vibe. And I think that's a good thing because having some kind of an emotional response from an image is it shows that it has some strength. It's a strong image in that sense. I also think I get why the photo is framed this way. I think he or she, I should say, the photographer wanted the subject dead in the center, which is what it is. But that also creates a kind of slight imbalance because just from a compositional perspective, because there's this black bar on the right, which is like the frame of the window or something. And then the left side has this black space, but the right side has a little bit of the glow. So I wonder if this would have looked better either cropped a bit to remove some of the left side or framed more to the right, or perhaps this would have looked really good framed as a landscape shot. But anyway, those are just speculations on my part because I wasn't there. I don't know. So I cannot speak. Maybe this is the perfect framing of this scene as it is in the scene. You know, if I was standing there, I would have maybe framed it the same way because I don't know what's around the frame. But anyway, I like this one. This has a nice impact. I also love the color. Color's really nice, very satisfying.
And if you personally see something like that later in the post, would you personally edit that or make it darker, or is that like a no for you to, you know, kind of,
you mean like
not remove,
right, like,
but just like dodge or burn, you know, if you because this is the light, right? And if you do just like a gradient filter from right, you can make it like completely black, right?
Sure. I agree, and I know I understand what you mean. The thought, as I was just talking about, it of course did cross my mind. I am very handy with Photoshop and I can do all kinds of cool stuff. But for me, for a street photo like this, I wouldn't do such a thing because, and this is not, you know, I'm sure many street photographers, especially old school ones, will tell you that's a no. This is a crime against humanity. You cannot do this kind of thing. I don't really care. I don't have like a, you know, like some sort of moral or ethical dilemma about it. I just have rules for myself, creative constraints. And one of those creative constraints is I don't add or remove things for my street photography. I just, what's there is there. If there's something that doesn't look good, like that car in the last photo or something, then I have to just go back and reshoot it some other way. That's the rule. And that's because you can, it's a slippery slope. Like once I start removing stuff, it can get really out of hand and just go crazy. So for me, the answer is no, I would not modify the photo that way.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Let's take a look at this one.
Okay, I like this one in many ways. I like it. I like, so I'll start with the positives about this one. Something about by the way, this is the first one that has this quality to it. The other photos were kind of, the people were abstract, but this one, we're getting a little bit closer to the subject, and I can feel more like some emotion or some, like there's like a story I can imagine about her. It may not be the truth. It may not be what was actually happening in that moment, but it's like a still from a movie scene, right? I can start kind of putting my own subjective kind of perceptions into this scene. And so I get a lot from that. The way she's posed, she's kind of like slouched. She's got like one shoulder up, sort of. She's looking that way. She's got it looks like she has an earbud in her ear. So maybe she's listening to some music. She's lost in thought. It's nighttime, I believe. It's kind of hard to tell, but it feels like it's dark because there's lights. There's like street lights outside. So it's maybe evening. But then again, it's kind of bright in the bus. So in any case, to me, it feels like it's late in the day. So maybe she's coming home from work. So I like all that. It's very subtle, and you can pick up all that just from this simple scene. And like I said before, less is more. This is a pretty minimal scene. There's not too much going on. The text is cut off, which is like, you know, maybe the camera could have been moved slightly more to the left and aimed slightly more to the right so that I don't see part of the text. Like there's a term, I believe it comes from psychology. It's called like edge flicker, I think. If you Google it, that might be it. It's just like when an object is cut off by the edge of the frame, we tend to focus on it. So that's a slight distraction, this text being like half in, half out. But it's a small thing. The main thing that I think is kind of a bad point is the way that light touches her forehead. Okay. So I would have moved around a little bit somehow to move that away from her so that the silhouette of her face is a little more distinct. Other than that, that's it. I mean, it looks cool. I like the faded colors. So yeah, I mean, I like the scene. But yeah, little things to make it really, really, really perfect. But those are really nitpicky, I admit.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, this one I like a lot as well. I'm a pretty positive guy, so I know you said like be you know, but I genuinely do like it. I do like the photo, and then at first glance, it's good. Again, in this case, it's again the color and that night vibe, kind of the similar thing to I said to that initial photo. It's that red is very mysterious. Where's this red coming from? It's, you know, if I'm logical about it, it's probably just a car out of frame with the you know, the brake lights are on and they're putting the red light down. But that's just, you know, me speculating about what's out of the frame. But just looking at the frame itself, I can imagine a lot of different things. I mean, it could be like a UFO coming down, alien abduction, you know. And I like that. There's a mystery to it, right? Because you don't know where this insane, like intense light is coming from. And then it's contrasted beautifully with the dark, you know, mountains in the night and the clouds back there. It's clearly a pretty long exposure because the clouds are very blurry looking, you know, like they've been moving for a while, but not that long because the stars are not moving. So, you know, it's this kind of calm scene. Again, the sense of mystery. Why is the car there? There's nobody in it. It's probably just a photographer's car, but, you know, again, we don't know that. So overall, I like it. I wouldn't honestly change much in this scene. all that stuff I said about the other photos, like composition, things being distracting, there really aren't such things in this photo. Maybe this like construction, barrier thing, but it's not a big deal. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I don't have anything like constructive to improve this photo. I think it just works for what it is. The story it's telling, I think it's telling pretty well.
All right.
Okay, so this one, again, I feel some emotion from it, just like the one with the lady on the bus, because, we can sort of make some assumptions about this kid and what's going on. I guess they're playing some sort of ball game, maybe soccer or futsal or something in the street. And this one kid is farther back and he's sort of observing. And I think the positioning of the elements in the frame is really good. I like that the kid is sort of, on the left. So he's looking at the group that's more on the right. So there's this, there's a leading line. A lot of people talk about leading lines as like actual lines, like the cliche examples, like the train tracks or something. But I think there's leading lines that are also like virtual or invisible. And there's clearly a leading line from him to where we assume he's looking, because he's looking at those kids. Plus, the line on the ground that he's standing on, the dashed, road line, they're kind of pulling us into that distant part of the frame. So the main subject, this kid, is very, very strong. There's some issues with the framing, like his head is overlapping that background. But it's, again, these are nitpicky things. I mentioned them in the other photos. They're not a big deal, ultimately. Overall, he's very well framed. The only thing I feel is a little bit missing in this photo is, so, okay, he's looking over there at that group, but that group, I haven't, I know I said they're playing the game, but there's not, like what's really happening over there?
Yeah.
It would be cool if there was maybe just less bokeh, so that we could see them a little more clearly. So meaning a smaller aperture. But of course, I understand it's nighttime, it's dark, you can't use f11 in the middle of the night. You're going to use a big aperture like f2 or something. So I don't know. I'm not sure what the solution would have been. Maybe it was no solution. Maybe this is as good as this photo could have been in this moment. And I think it works pretty strongly. It's just I wish I could see a little more in that group what they're doing. Maybe a better moment, better timing if there's some better action back there.
Thank you.
Okay, so these kind of photos I do take sometimes. We talked a little bit about motion, and sometimes I'll put a slow shutter and create this big blurry, messy abstract thing. And sometimes it turns out pretty cool, but sometimes it turns out a little more like this. So then I have to say a little negatively. But I'll say some nice things first, and I'll say I do like the colors. These colors are really beautiful. I love how the pink and the blue contrast. Right? I like the red umbrella, which took me a little while to realize that's an umbrella. But overall, I don't know if the blur effect, clearly the photographer was like turning the camera or spinning the camera or something to achieve this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it really adds here other than it just makes it look abstract. This is one of those things where it's like the shotgun technique, shotgun. You just shoot and it goes everywhere, and you take a bunch of photos and maybe one of them turns out okay. But it's good for trying. I think I appreciate, because again, I experiment with these kind of things too. But ultimately, I usually realize that these kind of things go nowhere. There needs to be some, I guess if I could be constructive in my feedback, there needs to be some control, because this was clearly done completely by hand, and the camera was moving in every direction. And when I do these, I used to do them this way, and I learned that I could move the camera on, say, 1 or 2 axes, but not all 3. Because if it's all 3, it turns into a mess like this, right? Whereas if you only move it on 1 axis, you get, say, vertical lines or horizontal lines. Or if you rotate the camera, you get radial motion. Or you can zoom, right? There's the zoom blur effect. If you do everything at the same time, it's kind of a mess like this. And I also like just the top of the frame, just looking at it, just concretely what it is. The top of the frame doesn't have so much motion, although of course it does, but you don't see it because there's no lights up there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think I've clarified that. And one last little tiny thing that jumps out at me, and a lot of people make this mistake, is notice this is from the edit, where the pink color and the blue color, there's like a very strong barrier on the right side of the frame. And that's because whoever was editing this, they just pushed the colors too much, and the colors kind of broke their, too much Photoshop. And that, again, most people probably don't notice that, but I notice these things, and they're very distracting to me when I see issues like that. But that's not the main problem with this photo. It's just too much motion, not enough structure.
All right. Thank you. Moving on.
And okay. So this is cool. I love taxis. That's why I said, ooh, okay. As you were scrolling down and then taxi came into view, I realized, okay, this is like the kind of thing I would shoot, because I always am hunting for taxi drivers. There's something about taxis in general that they're interesting and they're colorful, and they usually exude some character of whatever city they're in. In this case, I see some Asian characters. But I live in Japan, so it doesn't look like Japanese to me. I think this is in China or Taiwan or something.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it says TP129 on the text. I'm assuming that's Taipei. This is probably Taiwan. Just a hunch. Anyway, so you can get a lot of information from the taxi. There's such a representative thing of the city. And I also love that it's the moment when people are getting out, because that's when the taxi driver's little light is on, and you can see that in the photo that he's lit in there. And I like that. And then the scene overall is cool. This background is cool. It's interesting. What I would probably want if I was going to change something and make this photo more impactful is get closer. Because yeah, the building is cool, but what I really want to see is that taxi driver in there. I want to see a little bit more of these people getting out. And I feel like we're a little bit too far away. But maybe that's a different photo. Maybe I'm forcing the photographer to do something they weren't wanting to do. They wanted to show this building in contrast with the taxi, which does work. It's a cool scene, right? But yeah, that would just be my thing. And just lastly about the colors and the mood, I have a feeling this was shot on film. And that means the colors are just that they are what they are. I think they work here. I would love to see a bit of a cooler tone out of curiosity to let those reds pop, but it is what it is, and the colors do work. I think it looks nice, it's attractive, and it's like a satisfying photo to look at.
For me, I kind of feel like as the building has the brightest part of the picture, I'm quite not sure what was the main subject of the photo as my eyes keep going back there, right? And as you said, if that was a taxi, I would probably go a little closer and also try to get some kind of like a different gesture or some kind of better separation of the subject exiting the car, right? Because it feels like those are maybe two people, but they kind of blend together, I guess.
That's right. I think closer, maybe a horizontal frame instead of a vertical frame to better have like the driver on the left, the people on the right. And then also even like, it's hard to tell because it's so small here, but the mirror is kind of in front of his face actually. So, if the camera was a little lower, then he would be more visible. But to me, it seems like the intention of the photographer was to show us this driver, taxi, the whole thing there. But you're right, like the building is the brightest part. We're more kind of looking at the background as well. So yeah, I think that's the thing. Just getting closer overall, which is a very common feedback for so much street photography. Just get closer, which I struggle with too to this day. Sometimes I know I'm not close enough.
All right, moving on.
Yeah, this is really cool. Right away, I like this. This is a great shot. Because it's dangerous, and I don't mean this in like a physical danger, but in terms of like creative danger. It's dangerous to try to get like 3 people in silhouette like this, because inevitably what happens most of the time is they overlap in a really awkward way, and then you can't tell is it 1 person or 3 people or whatever. In this case, they overlap beautifully, and this is so cool the way the 2 guys in the back, the way their legs, like cross and create an X, and then I don't know, and they're all evenly spaced, and then on the ground there are 3 stripes that lead straight to the guys, and I think that's so cute, and it comes from the corner. I love when diagonal lines go from the corner, because then I feel like the image is like really fixed into the frame. Like if you have a corner and you put a line in, it feels like it's like, you know what I mean? Like wedged in there. That's sort of how I think about diagonal lines in the corners of photo frames, is that they kind of wedge the whole scene in there. So this whole thing is kind of wedged into that one corner, which I like. We talked a lot about distractions, which is something I'm always watching out for. What can I remove from the frame? I wouldn't really remove anything from this frame. There's nothing in here that's like pulling my eye away, There's a nice hierarchy. It's very obvious that I look at the guys first. I look at the lines on the ground, of course, the 2 big blue lights, and then I start to look around and find other things like the cables, the little arrow on the right side, the blue sign with the white arrow, the bus stop structure, whatever that is on the left. There's all these other little elements that I look at, I see them, but I don't see them before the subject. And that's what makes it a strong photo for me, where there's a clear hierarchy. Look here, 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 here. It could be anywhere in the frame, but I know kind of where I'm supposed to look. It's easy to parse visually. And then besides that, I love these colors. These blue and red auras mixing together in this kind of rainy, foggy haze is awesome. And so, yeah, this is a great photo. I really like this one. I would be happy to take such a photo myself. Let's put it that way.
All right, moving on.
This one is also really good. I like this too. I love the colors in this one. Now, the overarching theme is, and I've said it right at the beginning, with my night photography, I love looking for great colors and interesting light. And this photo has that. And that's why I'm happy to please just the previous one as well. It's pleasing right away, where overall, I love that purple aura in the sky. And then that subtle green in the grass, and green and violet are kind of complementary colors, right? But then we have these punctuations of orange in those lights. And again, I'm going to guess that this was probably shot on some kind of film, because I feel like film usually has these beautiful color contrasts and gradations at night. And then the glow as well from those lights. But who knows? Maybe it's digital. I don't know. Doesn't matter anyway. It's just my observation. And then, of course, the white houses, that white color, which has some color in it. It's kind of greenish, bluish, whatever. But basically, it's black and white. The house. It stands out beautifully from this otherwise colorful scene. Yeah, again, I love it. None of those distractions or anything. It's a very clean scene, very easy to look at, and it has a lot of mood. Also, the previous one, I said so many glowing things about it. I didn't talk about mood, so let's talk about mood in this one. There's so many like emotions I can pull from it, and again, as the viewer, I have sort of like free reign on how I can interpret it. So it leaves a lot of room for interpretation, but it gives me a lot to work with. So I can feel a sense of loneliness, a sense of nostalgia. It feels kind of like summer. Who knows? Maybe it's really cold, but I feel warm looking at this photo. It's like a hot summer evening in July, and I can hear like crickets and stuff. It's kind of a humid evening. It reminds me of like when I was a kid, because that's kind of what it was like, what I'm just describing of when I was a kid in Chicago growing up. So I like a photo that I can sort of place myself in it and feel what it feels like to be in this place, right? Even if I'm wrong, like I said, it doesn't matter because it's just my interpretation. But there's photos that will not give you much to work with, where you can't like really feel much or just sort of, okay, it's a thing. Well, this one has a lot of that emotional content, which I like, even though it's just photo of buildings, of houses, right?
All right. Moving on.
So we have another blurry abstract one. And I will say, you see this one, although it does have a lot of motion, kind of like that other one, there's a little bit more structure to it. And the reason I feel is because it's just simpler. There's less stuff in the frame. So I kind of know what I'm supposed to look at. I'm looking at the subject, which is this silhouette of a man that's kind of distorted within this arched passageway in some, kind of, I don't know, European kind of looking city. I'm going to guess like some kind of a castle sort of passage. That's my imagination. I don't know. And I mean, I like the colors as well. I like the kind of greenish tones with the violet tones, with the orange tones. But I will say though, in this case, there's the blurry thing. Like, again, it's very dangerous to use the blur at night. And because it makes me wonder, like, well, why is this part of the photo? Like, what does it add to the scene? How is the blur being used to say something about the scene or be included? Is it just like a visual effect?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not wrong, by the way. I think just a visual effect can be okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with something that's aesthetically pleasing just for the sake of being aesthetically pleasing. If that's the case, if this is just purely for aesthetics, then I think it's overall succeeding. I think the aesthetics, this kind of abstract aesthetic is cool. But I don't feel like it adds to any story that might have been here. And so unlike the previous photo just now, I don't feel much story from this photo because it's just abstract. So there's not much to take from it. I'll say one more thing in terms of composition and framing. I think this would look really good if it was cropped to like a 16:9 or something. I feel like there's too much space along the bottom, and the subject is like kind of floating far from the bottom of the frame. If it was more like a widescreen, like a cinematic sort of thing, I think it would help this image. It would make it easier to look at kind of from left to right and sort of ignoring this mostly empty bottom area. That's just a compositional thing.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I like this one too. So very different tone from like everything we've covered so far. This is obviously a more of a gritty street photo, right? As some classic street photographers say, you can smell the street in this one, right? It's a bit grittier. This weird kind of guy who's dressed like a dog. I mean, I don't even know what's going on. Is he just wearing like a dog helmet, like a mask that's like a fluff? I don't know. I never seen such a thing. He's got glasses on. It's all really cool. And this is a good example. On an earlier photo, I said it's kind of blurry, a little bit out of focus, a little bit unsharp, and it was a distraction for me because that photo was very much about the graphical quality of it. It was the silhouette, the contrast. This photo is also a little bit out of focus and whatnot, and I don't really care. It doesn't bother me at all because I'm not looking at it with a clear, interesting, impactful subject like this. Those technical things take a very, very secondary backseat. I mean, it would have been cool if like his hand was more in focus, whatever, or less motion blur, but honestly, it doesn't matter. What matters is this cool moment being captured. And the timing is nice. I like that he's framed evenly between those people. I actually like that you can't see those people's faces because, again, whatever's out of the frame for the viewer, like in my opinion, for me, the viewer, it's free reign. I can decide with my imagination anything I want about the immediate external part of the frame. So to me, all the people in the background are looking at this dude going like, what is going on? And that helps me create this narrative of like, this guy's just messing around. He's the star of the show. So I like that there's context, that if the people weren't there, it would be a little bit less interesting to me. So I kind of like that that's there. And yeah, I like it. That's it. I just like it. It's a cool, like kind of weird, crazy night scene. Very good. So again, I'll start with the colors because I think a lot of what I've seen tonight, the colors are really cool. And this one, no exception. I love this like pink, green, orange with a little bit subtle blues in there. It's a very nice palette. Very, very cool palette. And also like kind of the textures, the blurry wall, like the wall in the foreground's a little out of focus and the background's in focus. That's all really cool. But the main guy there himself, again, it's the curse of the backpack. That backpack looks like almost a second person. And again, it just makes me wonder, like, okay, this photo's all right. It looks pretty cool. Like I said, it has nice colors, nice mood, atmosphere. But it feels like the photographer should definitely come back here and shoot this again with a potentially better subject on a different time, a different evening or whatever, if possible. Maybe it's not possible. But this guy, unlike, for example, I don't know if you want me to reference too much previous photos that, because you might cut them out. But like we talked about a photo of the lady on the bus. And the lady on the bus, I said I could kind of imagine a lot of her emotions and whatnot. I struggle to get much out of this guy. He's just a guy, right?
Okay.
He's just staring at washing machines. So that's the missing part. I think it needs a better subject, but it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I first saw this picture. I was kind of like, if this was like a second person being like leaning on that guy, maybe having her hand on his shoulder, that would be like a super cool picture, right? And you could imagine like all kinds of stories what's going on. The back a little bit spoils that.
And actually, at very first glance, that's what I thought it was. Like right away, I was like, oh, and then I was, it's a person. Okay. It's not a person, then it's a bag.
All right, last photo.
So well, this is my photo. And what did I say about motion blur, right? See, I'm glad I pointed out so I don't sound like a hypocrite. Because if you look, like, for example, the gallery on my homepage that this photo is from, all the other photos are like tech sharp because I like them to be tech sharp. I try to. But I'm happy to ignore that rule if the just content of the photo itself has some impact and that if the motion blur adds to something. And to me, it did when I shot this. And by the way, when I shot it, I was quite disappointed by this fact that it was a little bit out of focus in motion blur. Because what was happening is this geisha got into the car, okay, and it was very dark. I mean, you can tell it was very dark, and I had a pretty slow shutter because I wasn't really shooting things that were in motion. And then at that moment, the car started to drive away. Like, this happened all very quickly. And honestly, this is like years ago, so I don't remember the details of how it all happened. The point is, it happened quickly, and it came out kind of blurry like this. And I was like, man, I messed this up. But then when I looked at it more closely, I realized that at least in this case, I was happy with the blur because it adds this feeling of kind of a little bit of chaos. And the geisha's life, if you know much about them and you actually spend time with them and you ever visit Kyoto and you understand what these girls, like how they live their lives, it is kind of like this. It's a little bit chaotic. You'd think that geisha have this very serene, they're these beautiful, performers. They play shamisen, which is like a guitar, and they do these dances and whatever. But actually what their main job is to entertain their customers, people that, they get hired out. They get hired to go to like a restaurant and hang out with a group of people who want to party and have a good time, and they entertain them. They do music, they drink with them, they play drinking games. They actually have this very fun and very difficult drinking game. They will beat you and you will be drinking, not them. And so and then when that appointment is finished, they go to the next appointment the same night. And so it's this kind of chaotic thing. And then on the street, now there's no tourists, but in these days, there's tons of tourists, myself included, who are seeing them and they're like, wow, they're sort of like celebrities. And the people they're kind of surrounded by like paparazzi. And by the way, in Kyoto, they are kind of celebrities. People know them. They have names, like stage names. So anyway, I'm getting really into the weeds about geisha. The point is that I realized that in this case, this motion blur, for me, some viewers might disagree that actually this is a crap photo because of the blur. But for me, the blur, I realized, adds to this life of the geisha. And despite being blurry and out of focus, I can still see her expression. I can still see that amongst all this blur, she's so calm and composed. Because that's another thing about geisha. They have to really control themselves and control their movements. They train all about how to move, hand gestures, everything is very trained. The only thing I hate about my own photo here, the one thing, is that stupid little light on her eye.
Okay.
I hate that thing. And then it goes back to everything I said about distractions. I hate little distracting elements like that. And if I could go back in time and fix that somehow, I would. I could totally Photoshop it out, which you asked me about earlier, and I refuse to because just my own personal belief, I don't want to like remove something from a photo if it's already there.
I don't really mind that light. It gives this like a sci-fi vibe of like, if you imagine geishas, how they move like really slow, and it kind of reminds me like a show I saw in Tokyo, the robot show. I don't know if you aware of that.
I know about it.
And you can see all that. I wouldn't say it's worth it for $60 or how much was it, but it reminds me.
Expensive,
yeah. And also, this is not like geishas are usually portrayed, right? They usually everything is usually very curated, I would say, to a picture geisha, because that's how they want us to see them, I guess.
And I've personally photographed many photos like that. When I've had chances to photograph them, I also photographed them very perfectly, very beautifully, with everything sharp. And it's fine. I'm happy with those photos, but this one came out just right to be messy. But I'll admit there was a lot of just happy accident here. It's not like I planned this. Like I said, I was trying to get a more clear photo. And in this moment, I did take some other shots of this whole scene, total, like different angles and everything. And she was also outside the taxi. And in the end, I realized those photos were really boring. They were actually quite dark. And this photo with this, and also the yellow light on the left is a reflection of the store or the restaurant behind me, right? So it's very lucky. It turned out very lucky in how quickly I shot this. Just like click, click, click as she drove away, that the reflections didn't cover up her face even more than that little laser beam, right? So I'll fully admit there was a lot of luck here. I think the only thing I can take credit for is just that I didn't discard this photo. Because like I said, at first I thought this is a failure. And only later, after a little while, did I realize, actually, this is pretty good. And now I keep it on my website as one of my favorite photos I've ever taken, especially of a geisha. So I think that maybe is the lesson here, that despite everything I said about blurry photos and all that, I think it is important to have an open mind and to be acceptant of flaws in images if there is an underlying substance to the image, right? Despite the technical flaws. Can I say one more little thing about this photo? You could cut this maybe later, but
no problem.
If I turn off, can I turn off the blur? How do I say? Change background. Okay, no blur. There we go. So actually, it's very hard to see, but that back there, see. It is this photo in a very large print of it, right? But it's not a print. It's actually an illustration that an artist friend of mine did of this photo.
Ah, okay.
Right? She asked me to use it. She drew it. So that's an illustration that big. She gave to me as a gift. She illustrated a number of my photos. And the reason I'm bringing this out, not to brag and show off or whatever, we could maybe, if you want, I could send you a link to her later. But the funny thing is, she moved the light on the eye.
Oh, okay.
So she repainted it almost exactly, like it's very accurate. She was very careful, but this one detail she moved, she kept it, but she moved it away from her eye so it's not overlapping. And I was like, I'm so envious of this power that illustrators have, that they can just choose to move something, whereas we photographers are stuck with reality and we have to use what we're given by the universe, and it is what it is. Anyway, side story. I don't know if that's interesting. Feel free to cut it out, but I just thought it was funny that she moved it. Yeah.
No, it was. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'm looking forward maybe to talk with you again, or maybe to meet you in Japan someday.
Please come. I'm looking forward to it, especially once people can start traveling to Japan again. I hope it's soon.
All right. So thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you so much. You too. Bye-bye.